Meet. Emily Hanna grew up on a cattle ranch about 20 miles south of Colorado Springs, Colorado. Her father, Kirk Hanna, was handsome enough to be a cowboy in a Hollywood movie. He liked to take Emily along as he did chores on the ranch, even when she was a little baby. He'd carry her in a little sheepskin pouch and tie the pouch to a nearby fence post, then get to work. Emily and her sister Maggie, who's 2 years older, were taught from an early age to work hard, to be fearless and independent. Sometimes Kirk would take them out on a four-wheeler, a small farm vehicle without a roof and with fat tires designed to drive off-road. Emily and Maggie would stand in the back and hold on tight to their father's shirt collar as he bounced the four-wheeler across the ranch. They'd ask him to drive faster, and whenever Kirk had to go round up some cattle, he'd stop the four-wheeler, tell the girls to get off, and leave them in the middle of the prairie all alone. For half an hour or more, little Emily and Maggie would stay there, patiently waiting for their dad to return, surrounded by thousands of acres of open land, with the Rocky Mountains looming to the west, and grasslands rolling eastward as far as the eye could see. Emily's father died unexpectedly in 1998, and her mother, Anne, had to decide whether to keep the ranch or sell it. Anne had grown up in the suburbs of Chicago. She knew a lot about riding and training horses, but not as much about running a cattle ranch. That had always been Kirk's job. It soon became clear that the girls loved the ranch and didn't want to sell it, and neither did Anne. So the three of them took over the Hanna Ranch, with help from a new foreman named Jim and from Uncle Jay, who owned the ranch next door. Emily was 7 years old. Maggie was 9. The girls had always done chores on the ranch, and now they had a lot more to do. They learned how to drive a four-wheeler and move cattle from one pasture to another. They learned how to throw a lasso and sort cattle in the corral. They took care of abandoned calves, feeding them milk from baby bottles and rubbing their sides at night to keep them warm. Life was never dull on the ranch. No 2 days were the same, and all sorts of unexpected things happened. One afternoon, Emily and Maggie got off the school bus and suddenly had to save the life of a pregnant cow. The ranch foreman was out of town, and their mother wasn't much use. A few days earlier, Anne's horse had spooked, knocked her down, and busted her leg. Now she told the girls to change into their work clothes and get into the pasture as fast as they could. A cow was out there, lying on the ground away from the rest of the herd, starting to give birth but having trouble. If the girls couldn't help quickly, within a couple of hours, both the cow and its calf would probably die. It was a freezing day in the middle of February with temperatures way below zero. Emily was 10 at the time, and Maggie had just turned 12. Each of them jumped on a four-wheeler and zoomed into the pasture. The cow was acting crazy. It was snorting, feeling confused and in pain. 2 of the calf's legs were already sticking out and dangling in the air, but the rest of its body was somehow stuck. Emily and Maggie calmly persuaded the cow to get up and head into the corral while they drove behind it on their four-wheelers, and then nervously watched as a neighbor helped pull the calf out safely. The mother cow and her baby survived. Anne was proud of her girls. In all their years on the ranch, she'd never heard them say, "No, Mom, we can't do that." They just went out and did it. Today, the Hanna Ranch has about 300 head of cattle. It also has horses, about half a dozen dogs that Anne rescued after other people abandoned them, and a variety of wildlife: deer, antelope, quail, wild turkeys, coyotes. Every so often, one of the coyotes will attack a cow when it's lying on the ground giving birth and eat the calf. But most of the time, the cattle spend their days and nights peacefully on the prairie, munching grass. Emily's 14 now, a freshman in high school, and a fourth-generation rancher, who sometimes starts the morning by feeding the horses, feeding the dogs, and cleaning cattle pens before the school bus arrives. Despite all the hard work, she loves living on the ranch. "To me, this is real life," she says. Birth, death, happiness, loss, gorgeous sunsets, winter storms, the sweetness of animals, the power of nature. On the ranch, she has seen them all. "You learn how to handle pressure," Emily explains. "When something's broken, you gotta try to fix it." Beef Trust. Ranchers and cowboys have always been symbols of the American West. Some historians have praised them as national heroes, the living embodiment of freedom and self-reliance. Others have condemned them for harming the environment and driving Native Americans off the land. There's one fact about ranchers that can't be denied, however. More of them are being driven off the land today than at any other time since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Ranchers now face a long list of economic problems: rising land prices, pressure from real estate developers, competition from overseas producers, health scares about beef. On top of all that, the growth of the fast food industry has helped transform the way cattle are raised, slaughtered, and processed. Today, McDonald's is America's largest purchaser of beef. In 1968, McDonald's bought fresh ground beef from 175 local companies. A few years later, McDonald's reduced the number of beef suppliers to 5. It started to buy frozen ground beef that could be manufactured on a large scale with a uniform taste. As the chain grew, McDonald's wanted its hamburgers to taste exactly the same everywhere. Much like the French fry industry, the meat packing industry has been completely changed to serve the fast food companies. Many ranchers now argue that a few large corporations have gained a stranglehold on the market, using unfair tactics to drive down the price of cattle. A century ago, American ranchers confronted a similar problem. Every major industry was controlled by corporate groups known as trusts. There was a sugar trust, a steel trust, a tobacco trust, and a beef trust. The beef trust set the prices offered for cattle. Ranchers who spoke up against this monopoly power were often shut out of the market, unable to sell their cattle at any price. In 1917, at the height of the beef trust, the 5 largest meatpacking companies, Armour, Swift, Morris, Wilson, and Cudahy, controlled about 55% of the market. The early 20th century had trusts, but it also had trust busters, progressive government officials who believed that corporations with too much power were a threat to American freedom and democracy. Starting with President Woodrow Wilson in 1920, the U.S. government took a series of actions to break up companies that had grown too large, protect small companies from unfair business tactics, and ensure that the prices were set by the free market, not by corporate executives meeting in secret. The beef trust was finally broken up, and for decades, ranchers enjoyed a relatively free and fair market for their cattle. In 1970, the 4 largest meatpacking companies controlled only 21% of the market. Then the fast food chains started to grow, encouraging their meat suppliers to get bigger. And the U.S. government stopped preventing large companies from taking over smaller ones. Today, the top 4 meatpacking companies, Tyson, Swift & Company, Excel, and National Beef, control about 84% of the market. These 4 companies now slaughter a larger share of America's cattle than the beef trust ever did. As the meatpacking companies have grown bigger and more powerful, independent ranchers have found it harder to earn a good income. When you buy beef at a supermarket, some of the money goes to the store, some of it goes to the meatpacking company that sold the meat to the store, and some of it eventually goes to the rancher. 25 years ago, ranchers got to keep 62 cents out of every dollar spent on beef. Today, they only get 47 cents. Most of the money goes to the supermarket and the meatpacking company. Until recently, ranchers usually sold their cattle at auctions. There might be dozens of bidders, and the cattle were sold to whoever offered the highest price. The whole idea of a free market is that a fair price will be set by a lot of potential buyers competing for the same product. The cattle market doesn't work that way anymore. With only 4 big meatpacking companies left, there isn't much bidding at cattle auction these days. Independent ranchers now have a hard time figuring out what their cattle are really worth, let alone finding anyone to buy them at a fair price. Every year, thousands of ranchers are quitting and selling their land. The great symbols of American freedom are being driven out of business by a market that no longer seems free. The ranchers most likely to be in financial trouble today are the ones who live the life and embody the values supposedly at the heart of the American West. They are self-sufficient, believe in hard work, and as a result, are now paying the price. Rotten eggs and burning poop. Greeley, Colorado is about 150 miles north of the Hanna Ranch, but it might as well be on another planet. You can smell Greeley long before you can see it. The smell is hard to forget, but not easy to describe. A combination of live animals, manure, and dead animals being turned into dog food. Think of rotten eggs mixed with burning hair and stinky toilet, and you get the idea. The smell is worse during the summer months, blanketing Greeley day and night like an invisible fog. Many people who live there no longer notice the smell. It fades into the background, present but not present, like the sound of police sirens and honking horns when you're in New York City. Other people who live in Greeley can't stop thinking about the smell even after years. It seeps into everything, gives them headaches, makes them nauseous, interferes with their sleep. Greeley is a modern-day factory town where cattle are the main units of production, where workers and machines turn big animals into small, vacuum-sealed packages of meat. The billions of fast food hamburgers that Americans eat every year come from places like Greeley. The industrialization of cattle raising and meat packing over the past few decades has completely altered the way beef is produced and the towns that produce it. Responding to the demands of the fast food and supermarket chains, the meatpacking firms have cut their costs by cutting the wages of workers. They have turned one of the nation's best-paying factory jobs into one of the lowest-paying. They have recruited a workforce of poor immigrants who have little power and suffer terrible injuries on the job. The harms of this new meatpacking system are being felt not only by the workers employed by it, but also by the animals processed by it, and by consumers who eat its meat. Welcome to Greeley, a sign along the highway says, an all-American city. Swift & Company runs one of the nation's biggest meatpacking plants just a few miles north of downtown Greeley. Weld County, which includes Greeley, earns more money every year from livestock than any other county in the United States. Swift & Company is the largest private employer in Weld County, running a beef slaughterhouse and a sheep slaughterhouse as well as processing facilities. Outside town, a pair of enormous feedlots supply the beef slaughterhouse with cattle. Each feedlot can hold up to 100,000 cattle. At times, the animals are crowded so closely together it looks like a sea of cattle, a mooing, moving mass of brown and white fur that goes on and on for acres. These cattle don't wander the prairie eating fresh grass. During the 3 months before slaughter, they eat special grain dumped into long concrete troughs that look like highway dividers. The grain is designed to fatten the cattle quickly, aided by growth hormones that have been implanted beneath their skin. Male cattle that will be processed for their meat are called steers. A typical steer will eat almost 3,000 pounds of grain during its stay at the feedlot, just to gain 400 pounds in weight. The process involves a good deal of waste. Each steer deposits about 50 pounds of urine and manure each day. Unlike human waste, this stuff doesn't get sent to a treatment plant. It's dumped into pits, gigantic pools of pee and poop that the industry calls lagoons. Slaughterhouse lagoons can be as big as 20 acres and as much as 15 feet deep, filled with millions of gallons of really disgusting stuff. As you might expect, the lagoons smell incredibly bad, and sometimes they leak, sending raw sewage into nearby rivers and streams. In 1991, 1 billion fish were killed in North Carolina by a disease linked to the runoff from slaughterhouse lagoons. People had to use bulldozers to bury the dead fish. The amount of waste created by the cattle that pass through Weld County is staggering. The 2 big feedlots outside Greeley produce more pee and poop than the cities of Denver, Boston, Atlanta, and St. Louis combined. The smell from slaughterhouse lagoons isn't just unpleasant, it can be harmful. The pools of waste emit various dangerous gases, including hydrogen sulfide and ammonia. Hydrogen sulfide, also known as sewer gas or stink damp, can be harmless in very small doses. Our own digestive system produces it. Bad breath gets some of its bad smell from tiny amounts of hydrogen sulfide. Large concentrations of hydrogen sulfide can kill you, although nobody's breath has ever been that bad. And even small amounts inhaled over a long period of time can cause all kinds of health problems. Slaughterhouse lagoons release tons of hydrogen sulfide into the air. People who live nearby often complain about headaches, nausea, asthma, shortness of breath, and dizziness. Some studies suggest that breathing air polluted with hydrogen sulfide can cause permanent damage to the nervous system and the brain. Farmers and ranchers have always used some of the manure from their animals as fertilizer. Putting manure on a field can be a good way to help crops grow, But no society in human history has ever had feedlots and slaughterhouses as big as the ones near Greeley. There have never been so many animals and so much manure in one place before. Strange things can happen when you don't watch out. In the fall of 2004, a pile of manure at a large feedlot in Milford, Nebraska, caught on fire. As manure decomposes, it gets hot and releases gases that burn easily, such as methane. If there's enough manure, it can catch on fire even when nobody lights a match. Big manure fires are no longer unusual. At the Milford feedlot, once the 4 million pound, 30-foot-high pile of manure started to burn, it was hard to put out. The local fire department tried twice without success. When the owner flattened the pile with heavy equipment, the smoldering fire spread. Spraying a lot of water on it threatened to pollute nearby streams. The massive pile of poop burned for nearly 4 months, with smoke drifting from it for miles. Mr. McDonald's breasts. Many cattle ranchers now fear that the beef industry is deliberately being changed to operate like the chicken industry. And ranchers don't want to wind up like chicken growers, who in recent years have become largely powerless, trapped by debt and by strict contracts written by the meatpacking companies. 4 chicken companies now control more than half of the American market. These companies have shifted almost all of their chicken production to the rural South, where the weather tends to be mild, labor unions are weak, and farmers are desperate to find some way to stay on their land. Although many factors are responsible for changing the chicken industry, one invention played an especially important role. The Chicken McNugget turned a bird that once had to be carved at a table into something that could easily be eaten behind the wheel of a car. It turned an agricultural commodity into a manufactured product. And it encouraged a system of production that turns many chicken farmers into economic serfs who must always obey company orders. "I have an idea," Fred Turner, the chairman of McDonald's, told one of his suppliers in 1979. "I want a chicken finger food without bones, about the size of your thumb. Can you do it?" The supplier, an executive at Keystone Foods, ordered a group of researchers to get to work in the lab, where they were soon joined by food scientists from McDonald's. At the time, doctors were praising the health benefits of eating chicken instead of beef. People in the United States were starting to eat a lot more chicken, a trend with worrisome implications for a fast food chain that only sold hamburgers. The nation's chicken meat had traditionally been provided by hens who grew too old to lay eggs. In the early 20th century, most chicken farms were small. The birds lived as long as 6 years, roaming outdoors and eating grass. After World War II, chicken farms emerged in Delaware and Virginia on a much larger scale. Raising chickens to be eaten and raising hens to lay eggs became 2 separate businesses. They had one thing in common. Both started to operate much more like factories than like old-fashioned farms. Fred Turner wanted McDonald's to sell a chicken dish that would fit neatly with the chain's other menu items. After 6 months of intensive research, the Keystone Foods lab developed new technology for the manufacture of McNuggets. Small pieces of ground-up chicken meat that were stuck together with edible paste, breaded, fried, frozen, and then reheated. The initial test marketing of McNuggets was so successful that McDonald's soon asked another company, Tyson Foods, to start manufacturing them too. Based in Arkansas, Tyson was one of the nation's leading meatpacking companies, and it soon developed a whole new breed of chicken for the production of McNuggets. Named Mr. McDonald, the new breed of chickens had unusually large breasts. Chicken McNuggets were introduced in 1983. Within a month, the McDonald's Corporation had become the second largest purchaser of chicken in the United States, surpassed only by KFC. McNuggets tasted good, they were easy to chew, and they seemed to be healthier than the other menu items at McDonald's. After all, they were made out of chicken. But their health benefits were an illusion. When a researcher at Harvard Medical School performed a chemical analysis of McNuggets, he discovered that they contained many of the same unhealthy fats as beef. How could that be? The McNuggets were being cooked in beef fat, just like McDonald's fries. The chain soon switched to vegetable oil, adding beef flavoring to the McNuggets to maintain their familiar taste. Chicken McNuggets, which became wildly popular among small children, no longer get their flavor from beef additives, but they still contain more fat per ounce than a hamburger. The McNugget helped transform not only the American diet, but also its system for raising poultry. The impact of McNuggets was so huge that it changed the industry, the president of ConAgra Poultry, the nation's second largest chicken company, later said. 25 years ago, most chicken was sold whole in the United States. Today, about 90% of the chicken sold has already been cut into pieces, cutlets, or nuggets. Gaining the McNugget contract helped turn Tyson Foods into the world's largest chicken processor. Tyson now manufactures about half of the nation's McNuggets and supplies chicken to 90 of the 100 largest restaurant chains. It now breeds, slaughters, and processes chicken. It does not, however, raise the birds. It leaves most of the expense and the risk of that task to thousands of farmers. A Tyson chicken farmer never owns the birds in his or her own poultry houses. Like most of the other leading processors, Tyson supplies its farmers with one-day-old chicks. Between the day they are born and the day they are killed, the birds spend their entire lives on the farmer's property. But they belong to Tyson. The company supplies the chicken feed, veterinary services, and technical support. It decides the feeding schedules, demands the purchase of certain equipment, and employs flock supervisors to make sure that these corporate orders are being followed. It hires the trucks that drop off the baby chicks and returns 6 later to pick up full-grown chickens ready for slaughter. At the processing plant, Tyson employees count and weigh the birds. A farmer's earnings are determined by Tyson's count of the birds, Tyson's measure of their weight, and the amount of Tyson feed that has been used. The chicken farmer provides the land, the fuel, the chicken houses, and the hard work. Most farmers must borrow money to build the houses, which cost about $200,000 each. A typical chicken farmer has been raising the birds for 15 years, owns 3 chicken houses, still remains deeply in debt, and after expenses, earns about $12,000 a year. About half of the nation's chicken growers leave the business after just 3 years, either selling out or losing everything. The back roads of the rural South are now littered with abandoned chicken houses. McCannibals. Nora Smith raises chickens in West Virginia. Like the farmers who supply Tyson, she never owns the birds in her chicken houses. Another company drops off day-old chicks at her farm and comes back with a truck a little more than a month later to take the chickens to the slaughterhouse. While the birds are at her place, the company tells her when to feed them and how to take care of them, sending over supervisors to make sure she's doing everything the way they want it done. After the company picks up the chickens, it decides how much to pay her. She has no control over the price given for her birds. Nora originally went into the business because she wanted to be an independent farmer. She thought raising chickens might enable her and her husband to have a comfortable life. But now she has 3 different jobs and works 60 hours a week just to make ends meet. A few years ago, her husband had a heart attack and Nora works hard to pay for his health insurance. On a recent morning at the farm, Nora pulled open the door to one of her chicken houses. The building was as long as a football field, and inside you could see 30,000 chickens packed close together. The squawking of so many birds made a tremendous noise. The air was full of dust, white feathers, and a really bad smell. The birds were 19 days old. They had only 18 more days to live. Aside from their first day and last day of life, they would never set foot outdoors. They were being fed a grayish mixture of old pretzels and cookies covered with a layer of fat. Chicken feed is often made out of whatever can be bought inexpensively. Sometimes the leftover waste from cattle slaughterhouses is added to chicken feed. Sometimes the leftover meat, fat, blood, and bones from chicken slaughterhouses is added to chicken feed, turning the birds into cannibals. The aim is to provide feed that will fatten chickens as quickly and cheaply as possible. In the wild, chickens don't eat other chickens. They prefer grass. These chickens will never see grass in their entire lives, Nora said. The industrialization of meat packing has not only changed the way chickens are raised, it has also changed the birds themselves. In 1994, Japanese scientists discovered that every chicken in the world could trace its origins back 8,000 years to a wild bird in Thailand called the red jungle fowl. Deep in the forests of Thailand, Pakistan, and India, red jungle fowls still live in their original habitat. The birds are colorful. The feathers of the male are green, red, and gold. Unlike today's chickens, red jungle fowls can fly. They can't soar high like a hawk, but they can fly short distances. Thousands of years ago, people began to keep red jungle fowls in cages, using them first in religious ceremonies and later as food. Farmers mated large birds with one another, eventually producing a bird with a thick chest that looked a lot like the modern chicken. It had more meat but could no longer fly. Unable to escape from predators, chickens became a tasty meal for foxes, skunks, dogs, cats, and hawks, as well as people. Like Mr. McDonald, the chickens developed for the fast food industry have been bred to develop large breasts and reach maturity in a short time. In 1965, chickens gained roughly 3.5 pounds during about 2 months on the farm. Today, they gain 5.5 in little more than half that time. If a child gained weight that fast, he or she would weigh 286 pounds by age 6. Some chickens grow such big breasts that they have a hard time walking when they have any room to walk. Their legs become crooked from all the weight and fill with fluid. They live in constant pain. Today's chickens also develop heart problems. They're big and fat and don't have any chance to exercise. Nora has been surprised lately by how many of her birds are having heart attacks. Seems to happen every day now. A chicken having a heart attack will suddenly stand up, get a startled look in its eyes, and then flip over and die. If you cut the dead bird open, you will find a thick layer of fat around the heart. Chickens that die from heart attacks have been struck by flip-over disease. It's most likely caused by gaining too much weight too fast. Nora collects the dead chickens in a bag and uses them as compost. Shocking. In 2006, about 9 billion chickens will be raised in the United States, slaughtered and then eaten. That works out to almost 30 chickens for every man, woman, and child in the country. Killing a chicken has never been pleasant. The old-fashioned method, used by farmers for centuries, is to chop off their heads with an axe. You've probably heard that a chicken can run around for a few moments without its head. It's true, although that's not something farmers like to see. The billions of chickens slaughtered every year to make McNuggets and KFC crispy strips don't get a chance to run around without their heads. They are killed at enormous slaughterhouses, hanging upside down, their legs shackled to a fast-moving chain that carries thousands of birds. Unlike the assembly lines at an automobile factory where cars are put together, the production lines at a modern slaughterhouse are geared for disassembly, as one animal after another is killed and then rapidly taken apart. 15 miles from Nora's farm, there's a slaughterhouse run by a company with an all-American name, Pilgrim's Pride. The name suggests a product that's wholesome and pure. Many of the farmers in Nora's neighborhood raise birds for Pilgrim's Pride, which sells chicken meat to KFC and other fast food chains. The slaughterhouse is a white building with a chain-link fence around it. Little smokestacks rise from different parts of the roof, sending puffs of steam into the air. It doesn't look like a scary place full of death and dying. It looks like a factory that could be making chocolate bars or lawn chairs or tennis shoes. You can tell it's a slaughterhouse when big trucks start pulling up, full of rustling and squawking chickens in cages, their white feathers visible behind metal bars. When chickens arrive at the Pilgrim's Pride slaughterhouse, their cages are rolled onto conveyor belts and tipped over. The birds tumble down a ramp that resembles a playground slide. When they land at the bottom, workers grab their legs and attach them to a moving overhead chain. Sometimes chickens break their legs trying to wiggle free. The chain carries them upside down to a large tank of water that's charged with electricity. When the birds are dunked into the water, the electricity is supposed to knock them unconscious. Chickens that have been properly shocked don't feel what happens next. But some birds manage to avoid the water by twisting their bodies and flapping their wings, or come out of the water still wide awake. Several years ago, McDonald's admitted that 1 or 2 out of every 100 chickens processed by the company's suppliers aren't knocked out by the stun bath. What happens next is painless for birds that are unconscious, but cruel to those still awake. The moving chain carries the chickens to a sharp rotating blade that slits their throats. The blade reliably kills almost all the chickens. Every so often, however, a bird that's still awake moves its head out of the way and dodges the blade. Moments later, that bird can suffer a painful death. The chain dunks the chickens into a tank of boiling water. Called the scald tank, it helps remove their feathers. It looks like a witch's brew of bubbling, bloody liquid. No chicken has ever been known to survive the scald tank. The birds that somehow live to this point are boiled to death. The company motto at Pilgrim's Pride is "Fresh from the farm every day," and the company website features cartoons of happy, smiling chickens. Yet a 2004 videotape shot inside the slaughterhouse near Nora's farm reveals little to smile about. The video was made by an animal rights activist upset by how the chickens were being treated at the plant. On some days, so many chickens would arrive there at once that workers didn't have enough time to shackle every bird's legs. Instead of attaching them to the overhead chain, workers would throw leftover birds against the wall. Some of the chickens that hit the wall were knocked out, but others continued to squawk and flap around. The video shows frustrated workers jumping up and down on the birds or picking them up and throwing them against the wall again. According to the animal rights activists, one worker put 3 live chickens on the floor and jumped on each of them. "I like to hear the popping sound they make," said the worker. The cruelty at Pilgrim's Pride Slaughterhouse was caused by a production line that moved too quickly and workers that were poorly supervised. But even a well-run American slaughterhouse inflicts unnecessary suffering on birds. At many European slaughterhouses, chickens aren't dumped from cages, grabbed, shackled to a chain, and then dropped into an electrified stun bath. They're kept in crates, placed in a sealed chamber, and then forced to breathe a gas that painlessly knocks them unconscious. At slaughterhouses that use this controlled atmosphere stunning system, workers never have to handle live birds, and chickens never get boiled alive. A study of controlled atmosphere stunning released by McDonald's in July 2005 concluded that it was more efficient than using a stun bath, better for the welfare of the birds, and better for the workers in the plant, without affecting the quality of the meat. But it was also more expensive, and McDonald's currently has no plans to ask chicken suppliers to get rid of their shackles and stun baths. The jungle. As bad as things can be at a chicken slaughterhouse, they can be even worse at a cattle slaughterhouse. Today's chickens are nearly identical in size, allowing most of the slaughterhouse work to be done by machines. But cattle still come in all shapes and sizes, varying in weight by hundreds of pounds. And as a result, much of the work in cattle slaughterhouse must be done by hand. Human error can cause unnecessary pain for the animals, injure workers, and contaminate the meat. Working at one of these plants is a dangerous and unpleasant job. It seems hard to believe, but at the dawn of the 21st century, in an era of high-speed computers and tiny cell phones, the most important tool in a cattle slaughterhouse is a sharp knife. The dangers of working at a slaughterhouse are nothing new. 100 years ago, the novelist Upton Sinclair traveled to Chicago, which at the time was the heart of the meatpacking industry. He investigated the mistreatment of poor immigrants from Eastern Europe who worked in the Chicago slaughterhouses. Angered by what he saw, Sinclair wrote a novel, The Jungle, based on his research. The book described a long list of slaughterhouse horrors that workers faced: severe back and shoulder injuries, deep cuts, amputated limbs, exposure to dangerous chemicals, and memorably, a workplace accident in which a man fell into a vat and got turned into lard. The plant kept running, and the lard was sold to the public. Human beings at the slaughterhouse, Sinclair argued, had been made into cogs in the great packing machine, easily replaced and entirely disposable. The Jungle also described filthy working conditions that threatened the health of everybody that ate meat. This is no fairy story and no joke, Upton Sinclair wrote. The meat would be shoveled into carts, and the men who did the shoveling would not trouble to lift out a rat even when he saw one. There were things that went into the sausage in comparison with which a poisoned rat was a tidbit. Diseased animals were routinely slaughtered and processed. The book was full of other disgusting details. Chemicals, such as borax and glycerin, were used to disguise the rancid smell of spoiled meat. Canned meat was deliberately mislabeled, and workers who needed to go to the bathroom weren't allowed to take a break. They were forced to pee right on the slaughterhouse floor, near meat the people would soon be eating. When The Jungle was published in 1906, it became a huge bestseller. The meatpacking companies that ran the Beef Trust immediately attacked the book and called Upton Sinclair a liar. After reading The Jungle, President Theodore Roosevelt ordered an independent investigation of its claims. When government investigators later told President Roosevelt that the book was accurate, he was outraged. Despite strong opposition from the meatpacking industry, he fought hard to gain congressional approval of the Meat Inspection Act of 1906 and the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. Roosevelt won the battle, and both of those laws were passed by Congress. For the first time, the U.S. government had the power to regulate the meatpacking industry and make sure that the meat being sold was safe to eat. Upton Sinclair was glad that these newfound food safety laws had been passed as a result of his book, but terribly disappointed that nothing had been done to help the poor meatpacking workers. He had written The Jungle in order to create sympathy for the workers, and instead had created an uproar about the filthiness of the meat. I aimed for the public's heart, Sinclair wrote many years later, and by accident I hit it in the stomach. It took decades for the working conditions in America's slaughterhouses to improve. Labor unions battled the meatpacking companies to gain higher wages, health benefits, and workplace safety rules. By the 1950s, the unions had largely won the battle. Working at a slaughterhouse was still a dirty job, but it had finally become a good job. In fact, meatpacking workers were soon among the highest paid factory workers in the United States. When they got hurt, they received good medical care. When the production line moved too fast, they could speak up and ask that it be slowed down. The wages were high enough to provide a decent middle-class life for workers and their families. It was considered a desirable way of making a living. There were wait lists for work at meatpacking plants. During the 1970s, the lives of American meatpacking workers took a turn for the worse. As meatpacking companies grew bigger to serve the needs of the fast food industry, they began to cut wages. They moved slaughterhouses away from cities like Chicago, where unions were strong, and opened them in rural areas where unions were weak. They recruited poor workers from Mexico, many of them illegal immigrants, and they sped up the production line. One company, IBP, led the way in changing how meatpacking workers were treated, breaking unions, reducing health benefits, and lowering wages by as much as 50%. Companies that wanted to compete with IBP had to imitate its low-cost tactics, or risk going out of business. As fast food chains spread across the country, the workers producing the meat for all those Whoppers and Big Macs saw their incomes plummet and their jobs become much harder. Today, meatpacking workers are among the lowest paid factory workers in the United States, and they have one of the most dangerous jobs. There aren't long waiting lists at American slaughterhouses anymore. In fact, the typical meatpacking worker now quits or is fired after just 1 year on the job. Don't complain. When a worker is badly injured, a government agency called the Occupational Safety and Health Administration often writes a report on the cause of the accident. The titles of some OSHA reports on meatpacking injuries give a sense of the potential dangers that workers confront every day. Employee severely burned after fuel from his saw is ignited. Employee hospitalized for neck laceration from flying blade. Employee's finger amputated in sausage extruder. Employee's finger amputated in chitlin machine. Employee's fingers amputated by guillotine blade. Employee's fingers amputated in meat blender. Employee's eye injured when struck by hanging hook. Employee's arm amputated in meat auger. Employee's arm amputated when caught in meat tenderizer. Employee burned in tallow fire. Employee burned by hot solution in tank. One employee killed, 8 injured by ammonia spill. Employee killed when arm caught in meat grinder. Employee killed in unguarded meat grinder. Employee killed when head crushed by conveyor. Employee killed when head crushed in hide fleshing machine. Employee killed by stun gun. Caught and killed by gut cooker machine. Serious accidents don't happen every day, but the risk of one happening is always present. During a visit to a cattle slaughterhouse, the dangers of the job were easy to see. Hundreds of workers, about half of them women, almost all of them young and Latino, sliced meat with long, slender knives. They stood at a table about chest high, grabbed meat off a conveyor belt, trimmed away fat, threw meat back on the belt, and tossed the scraps onto a conveyor belt above them, and then grabbed more meat, all in a matter of seconds. Even though the room was cooled to about 40 degrees, many of the workers were sweating. Hundreds of them were pressed close together, constantly moving and slicing. You saw their hard hats, white coats, and flashes of steel. No one was smiling or chatting. They were too busy, anxiously trying not to fall behind. In another part of the plant, cattle that had been sliced in half were suspended from an overhead trolley and swinging toward a group of men. Each worker had a large knife in one hand and a steel hook in the other. They grabbed the meat with their hooks and attacked it fiercely with their knives. As they hacked away, using all their strength, grunting, the place suddenly felt different. It didn't seem like a modern factory anymore. The machinery seemed beside the point. What was happening there had been going on one way or another for thousands of years. The meat, the hook, the knife, men straining to cut more off the bone. Knocker, sticker, shackler, rumper, knuckle dropper, navel boner, splitter top bottom butt, feed kill chain. Even the names of job assignments at a cattle slaughterhouse give a sense of the brutality involved in the work. 1,200-pound animals are sliced apart largely by hand. Cuts are the most common injuries suffered by meatpacking workers who often stab themselves or accidentally stab someone else nearby. Many workers make the same knife cut every 2 or 3 seconds, which adds up to about 10,000 cuts in an 8-hour shift. Doing anything that many times, again and again, is bound to hurt you. Meatpacking workers frequently develop back problems, shoulder problems, wrist pain, and trigger finger, an injury in which a finger becomes locked in a curled position. If a worker's knife becomes dull, additional pressure is placed on his or her muscles, joints, and nerves. It can cause pain to extend from the cutting hand all the way down the spine. Workers often take their knives home after work, spending at least 40 minutes a day keeping the edges smooth and sharp. Perhaps the leading cause of injuries at slaughterhouses today is the speed of the disassembly line. The old meatpacking plants slaughtered about 50 cattle an hour. 30 years ago, new plants in the countryside slaughtered about 175 cattle an hour. Today, some plants slaughter up to 400 cattle an hour, about half a dozen big animals every minute, sent down a single production line, carved by workers desperate not to fall behind. As the pace increases, so does the chance of risk of injuries. The reason the line moves so fast is easy to explain. Once a slaughterhouse is up and running, fully staffed with workers, the profits it will earn are directly related to the speed of the line. A faster pace means higher profits for the meatpacking company. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration is supposed to make sure that American workplaces are safe. But the meatpacking industry, through its friends in Congress, has made sure that OSHA inspections are rare and that OSHA fines are kept low. The maximum fine that OSHA can impose on a company for the death of a worker is $70,000. Now that might sound like a lot, but keep in mind that Tyson, now the world's largest meatpacking company, takes in almost 400,000 times that amount of money every year, roughly $27 billion. The OSHA has the authority to demand criminal charges against meatpacking executives who carelessly or recklessly endanger workers, but it rarely uses that power. A meatpacking executive who deliberately violates OSHA safety rules has a better chance of winning a state lottery than of facing criminal charges for causing the injury of a worker. In the days when labor unions were strong, meatpacking workers could complain about line speeds and injuries without fear of getting fired. Today, many workers don't belong to a union, and even those who do are reluctant to complain. Most of the workers are recent immigrants from Mexico who can't speak English. Many are illegal immigrants who lack the proper documents to be in the United States. And meatpacking workers are often employed at will, which means they can be fired without warning for just about any reason. Such an arrangement doesn't encourage people to complain about what's wrong. Workers who have traveled a great distance for these jobs, who have families to support, who are earning far more in an American meatpacking plant than they could earn back home in Mexico, are understandably afraid to speak out and risk losing everything. They are under tremendous pressure not to report injuries to the government. If a worker agrees not to report an injury, a supervisor will usually shift him or her to an easier job for a while, providing some time to heal. If the injury seems more serious, a Mexican worker is often given the chance to return home for a while and get better there. Workers who obey these unwritten rules get to keep their jobs. Those who disobey are likely to be punished or let go. From a purely business point of view, injured workers aren't good for profits. They're less productive. Getting rid of them and refusing to pay their medical bills makes sense, especially when new workers are readily available and inexpensive to train. Injured workers are often given some of the most unpleasant tasks in the slaughterhouse. Their hourly wages are often cut, and through a variety of methods they are encouraged to quit. Injured, unemployed, no longer able to do manual labor, these workers often become trapped in poverty. Cook it well. In January 1993, doctors at a hospital in Seattle, Washington, noticed that an unusual number of children were being admitted with bloody diarrhea. Some were suffering from a rare disorder that causes kidney damage. Health officials soon realized that the sick children had recently eaten undercooked hamburgers served at local Jack in the Box restaurants. Tests of the hamburger patties revealed the presence of E. coli O157H7, a bacterium that can cause severe food poisoning. Jack in the Box issued an immediate recall of the contaminated ground beef. Nevertheless, more than 700 people in at least 4 states were sickened by Jack in the Box hamburgers. Nearly 200 people were hospitalized and 4 died. Most of the victims were children. One of the first kids to become ill, Lauren Beth Rudolph, ate a hamburger at Jack in the Box a week before Christmas. She was admitted to the hospital on Christmas Eve, suffered terrible pain, had 3 heart attacks, and died in her mother's arms on December 28, 1992. She was 6 years old. The Jack in the Box outbreak received a great deal of attention on television and in newspapers, alerting the public to the dangers of E. coli O157H7. The Jack in the Box chain almost went out of business amid all the bad publicity. But this wasn't the first outbreak of E. coli O157H7 linked to fast food hamburgers. In 1982, dozens of children were sickened by contaminated hamburgers sold at McDonald's restaurants in Oregon and Michigan. McDonald's had quietly cooperated with government investigators, providing ground beef samples contaminated with E. coli O157H7, samples that for the first time linked the germ to serious illnesses. In public, however, the McDonald's Corporation denied that its hamburgers had made anyone sick. A spokesman for the chain acknowledged only the possibility of a statistical association between a small number of diarrhea cases in 2 small towns and our restaurants. Every day in the United States, roughly 200,000 people are sickened by something they ate. 900 are hospitalized and 14 die. More than 1/4 of the American population suffers a bout of food poisoning each year. Most of these cases are never reported to authorities or properly diagnosed. The widespread outbreaks that are detected and identified represent a small fraction of the number that actually take place. And there's strong evidence that the number of people getting sickened by food has gone up in the past few decades. Much of this increase can be blamed on recent changes in the way American food is produced. A generation ago, the typical outbreak of food poisoning involved a small gathering, a church supper, a family picnic, a wedding reception. Contaminated food made a group of people in one local area get sick. Such traditional outbreaks still take place. but the nation's current system of food processing has created a whole new sort of outbreak, one that could potentially sicken millions of people. The construction of large feedlots, slaughterhouses, and hamburger grinders has made it easier for E. coli O157H7 and other nasty germs to spread through the nation's food supply. In the 1970s, there were thousands of small slaughterhouses in the United States. Today, 13 large slaughterhouses supply most of the beef eaten by almost 300 million Americans. The meatpacking system that arose to supply the nation's fast food chains, an entire industry molded to serve their needs, to provide gigantic amounts of uniform ground beef so that all McDonald's hamburgers would taste the same, has proven an extremely efficient system for spreading disease. While medical researchers have pointed out the links between modern food processing and the rise in food poisoning, the nation's leading meatpacking companies have strongly opposed government efforts to pass tough food safety laws. For years, the meatpacking industry has managed to avoid the kind of rules that apply to the manufacturers of most consumer products. If a defective toy somehow poses a risk to small children, for example, if a piece could easily break off and be swallowed, the U.S. government can demand that every one of those toys be removed from the stores. But the U.S. government cannot order a meatpacking company to remove contaminated, potentially lethal ground beef from fast food kitchens and supermarkets, even if that meat can kill children. The government can't even fine companies that knowingly sell bad meat. We can fine circuses for mistreating elephants, the head of the USDA once admitted, but we can't fine companies that violate food safety standards. The ability of the meatpacking companies to avoid strict food safety rules has been made possible by their close ties to members of Congress. Each year, the industry gives millions of dollars to politicians who support its point of view. Meatpacking companies don't want people to get sick, but they also don't want to be held legally responsible when bad meat does make people sick. Being held legally responsible would require those companies to pay the medical bills of everyone sickened by their meat. The industry's attitude today is much the same as it was 100 years ago, when a member of the Beef Trust told Congress why his company opposed the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. "There is no limit to the expense that might be put on us," he said. "In all reasonableness and fairness, we are paying all we care to pay." The risk of contamination begins in the feedlot. Far from their natural habitat on the prairie, cattle in feedlots become prone to all sorts of illnesses. They get little exercise and live amid pools of manure. You shouldn't eat dirty food and dirty water, a government health official says, but we still think we can give animals dirty food and dirty water. Modern feedlots have become places where germs are easily spread from one animal to another. E. coli O157H7 can live in cattle troughs and survive in cattle manure for up to 90 days. The germs from infected cattle are spread not only in feedlots but at slaughterhouses and in hamburger grinders. The slaughterhouse tasks most likely to contaminate meat are the removal of an animal's furry hide and of its digestive system. If the hide hasn't been cleaned well, chunks of dirt and poop may fall from it into the meat. The digestive system is still pulled out of the cattle by hand. If the job's not performed carefully, the contents of the stomach and intestines may spill everywhere. The speed of today's production lines make the task much more difficult. A single worker at a gut table may have to pull the guts out of 60 cattle every hour. Doing the job properly takes a fair amount of skill. Doing it wrong spills the stomach contents full of germs all over the meat. Knives are supposed to be cleaned and disinfected every few minutes, something that workers in a hurry tend to forget. A contaminated knife spreads germs to everything it touches, and the faster the line, the more likely that people will make mistakes. The risk of widespread contamination grows when the meat's turned into ground beef. A generation ago, local butchers made hamburger meat out of leftover scraps. Ground beef was sold locally, and it was often made from cattle slaughtered locally. Today, enormous slaughterhouses and grinders dominate the production of ground beef. A modern plant can produce almost 1 million pounds of hamburger meat a day, shipping it throughout the United States and even overseas. A single animal infected with E. coli O157H7 can contaminate 32,000 pounds of that ground beef. And to make matters worse, The animals used to make about one quarter of the nation's ground beef. Old dairy cattle are those most likely to be sick and diseased. Dairy cows can live 20 or more years, but they're often slaughtered between the ages of 4 and 7, after their milk production starts to fall. McDonald's relies heavily on dairy cattle for its hamburger supplies, since the animals are relatively cheap and yield leaner meat. The days when hamburger meat was ground in the back of a little butcher shop out of leftover scraps of beef are long gone. The mixing together of meat from a large number of animals at ground beef plants has played a crucial role in spreading E. coli 0157H7. A single fast food hamburger now may contain meat from hundreds or even thousands of different cattle. Children who eat ground beef must make sure that it has been completely cooked. It should be well done. There shouldn't be a single particle of meat that still looks pink. Cooking the meat thoroughly kills germs like E. coli 0157H7, but it doesn't change a rather unappetizing fact. There are all sorts of complicated scientific explanations for how germs are spread in feedlots, how germs are spread in slaughterhouses, how germs are spread in hamburger plants. Behind them lies a simple explanation for why eating a hamburger can now make you seriously ill. There is poop in the meat. Run. Chickens are pretty dumb. Cattle are smarter, and pigs are rather intelligent. In fact, pigs are even smarter than dogs. Pigs are also sensitive, highly social animals. Contrary to what many people think, they like being clean and roll in the mud only on hot days to cool themselves off. For thousands of years, pigs have been raised by farmers, allowed to roam outdoors until it's time to be turned into bacon, pork, or ham. During the past 20 years, however, pigs have been raised indoors at giant hog factories that look more like prisons than farms. The mother pigs are often confined for months in crates that are too small, so they can't even walk or turn around. Piglets are taken away from their mothers at the age of 3 weeks, about 3 months earlier than they would separate from each other in the wild. Piglets are crammed into pens with steel floors. The pens are so crowded that the piglets, which are friendly by nature, start biting each other's tails. To prevent injuries and infections, workers now cut the tails off. Scientists have little idea what pigs, cows, and chickens might be thinking as they head to their deaths at a slaughterhouse. It's unlikely that they know what's about to happen. Many farm animals have been bred to be calm. Most of the time they appear to lack emotions. But you can tell when cattle are frightened. They tend to bellow. The latest slaughterhouses are designed to keep cattle quiet and relaxed as they march up the ramp to their doom. The ramps curve and have walls on either side to prevent the cattle from seeing what's ahead. While most livestock never realize that they're about to become pieces of meat, every so often an animal seems to know exactly what's going on. On January 8, 1998, at the V&G Newman Slaughterhouse in Malmesbury, England, 2 pigs were just minutes away from being killed when they wriggled through a hole in the fence, swam across a nearby river, and ran off. Newspapers soon called the pigs Butch and Sundance, nicknames referring to the Wild West outlaws in the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Despite an intensive search by television crews, local police officers, and animal rights activists, Butch and Sundance roamed free for more than a week. Sundance was finally cornered and shot with a tranquilizer dart that made him feel sleepy. Butch was discovered in somebody's backyard garden looking for a snack. Butch, it turned out, was actually female. She was thought to be Sundance's girlfriend. A British newspaper, the Daily Mail, bought the 2 pigs and donated them to a farm in Kent. Butch and Sundance still live there today, happily playing and sunbathing outdoors. A few years earlier, an American dairy cow named Emily attempted a similarly daring escape. Although she was only 2 years old, her owner thought that she wasn't producing enough milk and sent her to a slaughterhouse in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. On November 14, 1995, Emily stood in a line with other cattle inside the slaughterhouse gates. Moments before it was her turn to enter the building, Emily suddenly decided to run off. Workers said she leaped over a 5-foot-high fence, kept on running, and disappeared into the woods. For more than a month she lived in the woods amid herds of deer foraging for food. A couple of vegetarians found Emily, adopted her, and took her home to their farm. Children from a nearby school helped take care of her. A group of Hindu priests from India visited her and blessed her as a sacred cow. When Emily died of natural causes in 2003, dozens of people attended her funeral, and a statue was later placed at her grave.